Welcome to Furious Driving Engine. Join me by the fireside for a trip back in history, half a century to 1975. Because can you believe 1975 is now 50 years ago? That's almost half a century. Which, considering the 1990s was only a few weeks ago, I find this particularly hard to grasp. Looking back, it's a world which was strangely familiar and comfortable, at the same time though incredibly alien and very, very different indeed. Now the calendar might roll over, but decades don't really change until a few years in, and then almost immediately start moving into the next decade, almost imperceptibly. Of course we don't notice it at the time, it's just time passing, but the designs, the fashions and everything do reflect this. And by 1975 the hazy optimism of the 1960s had finally ebbed away, and the pessimism and extreme flares of the 1970s led to the intense brownscape which we can look back on now. However, if you turned on the TV in 1975, you'd have seen tomorrow's world and the exciting LED and LCD lit world of the microcomputer that was coming in the 1980s. So things were very exciting to come. And new car launches of the year reflected this. So I've picked a dozen or so of the ones which I think are the most significant in terms of design, technology, aspiration even. And I've split them into three categories, plus a bonus what were they thinking group. We have cars that were looking to the future, the ones that embraced new ideas and technology and shaped the cars that were to follow. They were the cars of their time, which, although they looked new and fresh in 1975, well, they didn't really do anything dramatically different and didn't really push things forward. And then of course we got the phoning it in specials, the cars that sold well at the time but literally did nothing to push any boundaries and were just a comfortable way of pushing tin for the manufacturer. So let's look at a few of the cars that were new and fresh 50 years ago but are now old enough to collect their automotive pension books with already 10 years of MOT and tax exemptions in hand. And of course can be insured with channel sponsor Lancaster Insurance Services, check the link in the description. So let's work through the list and we'll start off with the what was that's. Okay, so starting off in the WTF category, we'll begin with the old favourite, the Reliant Kitten. New in 1975. Now the shape of the Reliant Kitten came from Ogle Design, who were very much the friendly face of industrial design in the 1970s. And it was based around the Robin three-wheeler and as much as possible part shared with the other car in order to keep costs down. In fact, from the middle backwards it was pretty much exactly the same. It was Reliant's second attempt at a small car and the debut of the mighty 850cc engine. In fact, they actually built the Kitten up until 1982 and then they sold the rights to Sepani Automobiles in Spain, who continued to build it until the early 1990s. The back half is all Robin, but the front half is actually quite clever and even has double wishbone suspension inspired by Lotus and headlights nicked from the Allegro. Right, next up we have the Volvo 66, which is significant because it was the first Dutch Volvo. It was based very closely on the DAF 66, so designed by Micheletti, which is quite a big thing in itself, but really all anyone remembers about it is the fact that it's got a CVT gearbox. It was Volvoised for safety, obviously, being a Volvo. That meant it got new seats with better headrests, side impact protection bar, safety steering wheel so you don't hurt yourself in a crash, and it even gained a P position on the gear shifter so you couldn't roll away quite so easily. It did still have the Renault C engines. Another big improvement for the Volvo was it gained a declutching servo so that you could change gears with the choke out. Apparently at fast idle the centrifugal clutch would engage so you couldn't shift gears, which sounds like an alarming oversight. Hubnut will be pleased to know that from 1977 it did actually gain a rear windscreen wiper, which is exciting. Next up in the WTF category we've got the Hyundai Pony, which I do kind of think now is a bit unfair putting the Pony in this category, but it's just because it was so unusual to see a Korean car in Europe in 1975 and we literally never see them at all anymore. But it was a very significant model because it was Hyundai's first homegrown, entirely in-house model. Up until then they'd just been rebuilding Cortinas under license, but they really wanted their own product. So they poached a load of British and European engineers and designers to create something. They stole George Turnbull from Austin to head up the project, and he in turn poached Kenneth Barrett as body designer. Then you also got John Simpson, Edward Chapman and John Crosthwaite as chassis and development engineers, and also Peter Slater as the chief development engineer. I'm reading this, there's too many names for me to remember. It has Giugiaro styling through Ital Design, Mitsubishi Lancer platform, a Marina engine and a Mitsubishi transmission and plenty of Cortina bits because there's lots of those hanging around the factory, having just been building them under license. And significantly, it was very modern. It was a hatchback, it was monocoque construction, and it had several body styles. It was everything that the European competitors were lacking, but because it was Korean, no one really took it seriously, and how they're laughing now. At the time though, it did fall into the WTF category. And finally, for the what were they thinkings, we've got the biggest what were they thinking of them all, the AMC Pacer, made obviously very famous by Wayne's World as the Murphmobile. And it was the perfect casting choice for a car in that movie. The outcast, the misfit, the goofy looking one. Perfect. It was created to be the American answer to the influx of small, economical European and Japanese cars. And so the obvious answer from AMC was a compact car that was 4.5 metres long with a 5-litre V8 option. Perfect. The smallest engine was actually a 3.8 litre inline 6, which is still not exactly frugal, and it came with the choice of a 3-speed manual or automatic. Later on there was, I think, a 4-speed manual as well. Now AMC was the smallest of the big American automakers, so they struggled with resources and they had big ideas but shallow pockets, so they really did struggle to put those ideas into paper. And so although it looked quite radical and had radical ideas, it came out very, very traditional under the skin. So front engine, rear wheel drive, nothing breaking the mold just there. And its kind of odd gawky looks come from the fact that they decided to build a car around the interior of a full-size American car, which is obviously very wide. Combine that with the large glass area for safety reasons. 37% of the car's external surface is in fact glass, and you wind up with a weird bubbly jelly bean thing, which looks very unusual indeed. Its 1.96 metre wide body was partly because American drivers were used to full-size, full-width cars, but probably more to do with the production tracks in the factory were set up for full-size cars, and they couldn't afford to change them. So it has curious proportions all round, and the thing everyone remembers about it is the fact that the passenger door is longer than the driver's door, which is sort of practical, so you can get into the back seat from the pavement more easily, which kind of makes sense, but just makes it even more odd. In its favour, it was though built for the upcoming safety regulations that everyone knew were coming, and so it lasted in production with very few changes for a very long time and was pretty safe for a 1975 car. Although the extra weight of all the safety and the glass did mean it got appalling MPG, 19 to the gallon imperial, so it was not a great success at being either small or frugal, as they'd intended. Never mind. Anyway, that brings us on to the second category, which is the phoning it in category. It's a special award for two cars that debuted 50 years ago this year and in fact did sell incredibly well. They stayed in the top 10 sellers for pretty much most of the decade. However, the manufacturers put absolute minimal effort into their design and conception. So the first of our reheated leftovers is the Mark II Morris Marina. Everyone's favourite automotive whipping boy, the Morris Marina, the ADO 28. It looked very fresh, very clean, very modern in 1971 when it launched. But under the skin, it was still rocking decades old technology because they pilfered bits from the Morris Minor to make it happen. The only most modern component underneath the skin was in fact a Triumph 4-speed manual gearbox. But the thing was, they'd only really planned to build the Marina for 5 years. It was just a stopgap until the next newer, more modern iteration of something appeared. However, limited budgets, limited time, all the rest of it, meant that it soldiered on way longer than intended. The typical old British Leyland problem. So when the Mark II came out in 1975, it was really just a midlife facelift, and the biggest change was the addition of the BL plughole on the grille badge. Of course, there were some fancy new bits of trim to make it look a bit fresh. However, under the skin they did give disc brakes across the range and finally gave it front and rear anti-roll bars, not just on the 1.8 where it was desperately needed. And they improved the suspension and steering, which in fairness is stuff they should have done from the very outset, but they hurried development and so the cars missed out on those kind of crucial things. It kind of made the car what it should have been from the very beginning. So there you go, the Mark II Marina. Not much of an update. The second phoning it in special for 1975 was another Mark II, the Mark II Escort, and another car which stayed in the top of the sales charts for most of the rest of the decade. Brenda, aka the Mark II Escort, it used all the underpinnings, the gubbins and the structure of the Mark I, but in a new, squarer, sharper, more modern body style, which looked remarkably similar to the old one, just a bit more edgy. And although there was a slightly revised underbody, this is something that came in during the last 6 months of the Mark I, so it was yet another carryover from the previous generation. And of course, it still used cart springs in the back, so it was a very, very basic car, which continued in that format right up until the Mark III in 1983 when everything new came along. So that's the phoning it in specials. Now we've got what I like to call the cars of their time. Now these are the cars that were new and exciting in 1975. They tried a little bit harder to be different, to be modern, to be cutting edge and push things on a little bit more. But their design and technology does really just pin them to their era. So looking back, they can only really be from 1975. And the first of these is a big seller again, the Mark I Cavalier, new and very exciting indeed. It looked futuristic and it filled the slot in Vauxhall's mid-size family range lineup perfectly, but despite the aerodynamic droop nose nicked from the Manta, it was only available as a four-door saloon. They planned an estate and a van, but they never escaped into the wild, but they never even envisioned a hatchback, so it really did set it kind of firmly one foot in the past. Significantly, in terms of technology, it's front engine and rear wheel drive, not in a rear wheel drive luxury or steely-eyed helmsman kind of way, but in a old and traditional kind of way. It was based entirely on the Opel Ascona B, itself based on the GM U-Car platform. The only significant input Vauxhall designer Wayne Cherry could make to it was the nose and the badging on the back, having been forced by GM Global to drop the car they were 6 months away from putting into production as their own unique Cavalier and be forced to use the World car platform. Good car, but who knows what we could have had instead. Now the next one is very much of its time, but it lasted 2 decades. Yes, the Jaguar XJS. It's an incredibly 1975 looking thing in its earliest format. And yeah, they built it for 21 years. Amazing. The E-Type replacement was a long time coming, and in the end it was developed from the XJ6 platform. And the thing people always talk about is the flying buttresses. They assume it was intended to be a mid-engine car. It never was. That's entirely for aerodynamics. It was a radical looking thing, and although the E-Type had become a late Elvis bloated version of itself, the very different, very modern looks and Malcolm Sayers' flying buttresses, they didn't hit home with buyers initially. They took a while, but eventually they did, and the world kind of got comfortable with them. Through careful trim changes, the car did evolve through into the 1990s, but looking back at the 1975 form, it is pure 1975. It is just, lovely in its 1975-ness. The question is, did it influence TV and sci-fi set design, or did TV and sci-fi set design influence the XJS? I guess we'll never know. Now this one is an odd one. The Rolls-Royce Camargue. Now, Crewe took the concept of the personal luxury car to the absolute limit. Now, the Camargue is 5.1 metres long, it's got a 6.75 litre V8 engine, and it's only a two-door coupe, and it has the kind of gawky, weird looks that could only come from the mid-1970s. It looks like it's rolled off the set of Thunderbirds, but perhaps the fact that it took 8 years to design, so it stems from the late 1960s, maybe it did. It's Pininfarina designed and based on the platform of the Shadow and the Corniche, and its wheelbase is over 3 metres long. Bear in mind, only a two-door coupe. It's incredibly luxurious, but it is just the most ridiculous, conspicuous wealth, and it frequently makes lists of the world's most ugly and worst cars. In fact, in Richard Porter's book Crap Cars, he would call it utterly terrible. So, sorry Rolls. Now, not utterly terrible, but again, very much of its time. The Mercedes-Benz SEL 450 6.9. Now this is a choice of dictators everywhere. The SEL 450 6.9 is often just called the 6.9. Its biggest claim to fame is that Claude Lelouch eventually revealed that the car he used to film Rendezvous driving through Paris at dawn was in fact a 6.9. And he just overdubbed the sound of the Ferrari 275, which everyone assumed he had actually driven through Paris in the morning. I always thought the giveaway was when he went up a curb, and I thought the Ferrari wasn't going to make that. The 6.9 is an underrated flagship. It looks almost exactly the same as a regular W116 Mercedes, but cost a third more. Most of the options on the 450 became standard on the 6.9, and you got unique wood trim in the car as well. The W116 was Friedrich Geider's last design for Mercedes-Benz. However, it was also the first of their new design language, which carried all the way through until the 1990s. This was ultra-luxury German style. Perhaps the design style should put it into the forward-looking category, but it did miss certain things like electric seats, which just weren't an option ever. And the last of our cars of their time is the Triumph TR7, Harris Mann's wonderful wedge. The shape of things to come, as the adverts said at the time, if things were blocks of cheddar. Production started in late 1974 in Speke near Liverpool, and the car went on sale in the US in 1975, here in the UK in 1976. It was the first TR sports car not offered as a convertible because they thought the Americans were going to ban convertibles and that was the biggest market for British sports cars, so they weren't going to bother. And despite its incredibly modernistic, futuristic, unusual wedgie styling, it is very traditional underneath. Front engine, rear wheel drive, and it uses a bored out version of the Dolomite 1850 engine taken out to 2 litres. It's actually a very nice thing to drive, but just too much of a hard look at the time, and so it never really achieved the kind of sales success it should have done. The radical styling was pure 1970s, just the 1970s wasn't ready for it. Okay, so this next category is looking to the future, the cars that were really embracing things that were to come. We'll start with another American, the Cadillac Seville. This was Cadillac's answer to luxury European imports, which were smaller, more luxurious and more expensive than their offerings. It was also their answer to the general downsizing of the ridiculously oversized American cars of the 1960s and 70s, as well as the fact that younger buyers just were not interested in buying Cadillacs. So they needed to do something to bring a new customer base in. And it has very humble underpinnings. It's built on the GM K-body platform, which is a rear-wheel drive unibody shell, itself based on an enlarged 1968 to 1974 X-body platform, and that meant it could dip into an awful lot of the GM parts bin to keep costs down behind the scenes. The Seville became Cadillac's smallest but most expensive model, an exquisite jewel if you will, and apparently it took the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow as inspiration. However, the crisp square body which managed to keep on looking current and modern into the 1980s. Now, from one end of the market very much to the other, we've got the Vauxhall Chevette. It has sharp looks and, modern for the 1960s, a unibody construction. However, it does have a hatchback and a pointy nose. But underneath it's just a reskinned GM T-car. This is the subcompact world car that Vauxhall had thrust upon them by GM Global. And like with the Cavalier, they were forced to drop their own project, which was called the S-Car or the Baby R, and embrace this. With its shovel nose, it looks very different from the Opel Kadett, which is basically the same car. So the buying public assumed it was an all-new model, not the same car they could buy in their Opel dealer down the road. But unlike some of its competitors, it did have that hatchback and coil suspension all round. Interestingly, Vauxhall's Ellesmere Port facility was actually built specifically for this car in order to bring employment to that area. Bet you didn't know that. Now, another small car which was also very significant in 1975, the VW Polo X Audi 50. Now, the Type 86 VW Polo and Audi 50 was an utterly new concept in small cars. It took the Chevette's hatchback but threw in front-wheel drive, a touch of Bertone design, and made something that was thoroughly modern. Really, the Polo was just the Audi A50 from 1974 but with a new badge and very little else changed. But the Polo sold much better than the Audi, and so the Audi was dropped after just 3 years, and the Polo is still going on today. And significantly, every small car ever since has followed that same front-wheel drive, hatchback, independent suspension pattern, including the current Polo and the Audi A1. Now next up, another Harrisman creation, the Austin Wedge, the ADO 71. Now, this front-wheel drive, it's sharp and aerodynamic, it's got a monocoque shell. This was the shape of things to come again, except it wasn't. It looks like a hatch, and Harrisman actually designed it as a hatch, but BL's brilliant management, in their infinite wisdom and forward-looking thought processes, decided that their customer base wasn't going to accept a hatchback and it might compete with the rear-wheel drive, larger, more expensive Rover SD1. And so they made them change it. Really, because they took the hatch away, I should have put this into the of its time category rather than looking to the future, but because Harrisman designed it as a hatchback, I'm going to let that one slide because I like Harrisman. So now, the BL Wedge was badge engineered to within an inch of its life, with models from Austin, from Morris and from Woolers LLE. The Austin was the one that was closest to the original clean design and trapezoidal body style, and it looked clean and modern for the 1970s. But the other two, with their raised hump in the middle of the bonnet and the afterthought grille, it made them look about a decade older. So for me, the Austin is the winner. Now for our penultimate car in this list, we finally get all the elements together. Unibody, front-wheel drive, hatchback, multinational corporation. Yes, it is the Talbot 1500 / Chrysler Alpine / many other things. It's all there. It's all there with Chrysler Europe's family car. It's British styled by Roy Axe and his team, and comes with French mechanicals with a Poissy engine at first. It was sold around the world. What was it sold as? It was sold around the world as a Simca, a Chrysler, a Talbot, a Dodge, and it was built in 6 countries as well. It was one of the first true global world cars. It might feel basic by today's standards, but at the time it was modern and cutting edge. Despite the rattly engines, it was a really truly modern car. And that could have made it my car of the year 1975. Instead, the car of the year 1975 actually was the Citroën CX, but that came out in 1974, so I couldn't include it. My actual car of the year 1975 is, drumroll please, the Mark I Golf GTI. Not just the Golf itself, but the GTI, because that was such a majorly significant car. Now the Golf GTI took all the elements we've just been talking about, the front wheel drive, the hatchback, the monocoque shell, all of that kind of stuff, independent suspension, chucked it in there with a performance engine, lowered sporty suspension, and added that dash of sparkle that cars so rarely seem to get, and made something truly special. The recipe was almost there with the factory cooking models. It had coil springs, it had semi-independent rear suspension, independent front suspension, disc brakes up the front, but Volkswagen just weren't interested in a performance model. They tried a performance model with the Beetle, it had crashed and burned, they weren't bothered. So this became a skunkworks project with just 8 internal engineers and executives doing something off the books quietly. They actually used a Scirocco shell for the development and researched and developed this car kind of in their own time, kind of on company time when no one was looking. That makes it even more exciting. Now, although they didn't create the genre of the hot hatch already, that was already existing. Things like the Alfa Side were already around and were already hot hatches and very good indeed. The Golf GTI is the car that really kind of hammered home what a hot hatch should be, made it popular, and really put the final nail in the coffin of the traditional sports car by giving all that fun but throwing in the practicality. You could take it to work, you can drive it in the rain, you can do the shopping, you can go on holiday. It does everything, and it's all that fun in one place, and it's super reliable because it's a Golf. The first 1975 cars were only a 1.6 litre engine with a 4-speed gearbox, but the car only weighed 840 kilos, which just makes the thing feel so alive. And of course, it's 1970s small, so it fits perfectly down a B road where you can really exploit that nimble and fun chassis and get the most out of the Golf GTI. If you drive one today, you'll still be amazed at how good it actually feels. Possibly even more fun. Nowhere near as fast, but perhaps more fun than the current generation. My opinion, the car of 1975, or the new car of 1975, is the Golf GTI. Small caveat, it was launched in 1975. You couldn't actually take your own car home until 1976, but it was still a 1975 car. And when it comes to hot hatches and sports cars, it changed everything. It put the spade in the ground to dig the grave of the classic sports car, something that we wouldn't see again for another 14 or 15 years when the MX-5 came back. And it was the car that really gave the hot hatch popularity, kicked open the doors to that particular genre, so every other manufacturer had to have one, and led to the hot hatch explosion of the 1980s. And so it really set the tone, and to a large extent the social and aspirational tone of the next decade. So what do you think? Do you agree with the cars I've put into this list? What would you put into your list of top cars launched in 1975 if you were going to put this list together? And would you move them into different categories? Would you shuffle them around? Let me know in the comments, and join me again next time listing something completely different. Goodbye.